Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin and today's topic is rewriting history. It should be a fun topic. We kind of tend to treat history as if it's immutable, as if it's a thing, like as if it's true, whether it's our personal history or our collective history. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning, and welcome to everybody else who's joining us. It's great to be here with you, starting a new week, and I love this topic of rewriting history because we kind of think like history is fact, right? But the truth of it is that the perspectives that we take on history and the things that we include and the things that we eliminate very radically alter the history itself. So should be an interesting conversation, but before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And this time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating this brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue, and now let's press our palms together, vigorously rub your hands together, feel all those sensations, the pressure, the motion, the temperature, the friction, and all the tickling and tingling when you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So good to be here with you. So this is such a cool conversation because so much of the work, this is where this conversation is coming from, is that so much of the work that I do with people is allowing them an experience or facilitating an experience for them of actually going back into their past and shifting the dynamic of it, not necessarily rewriting the events, but maybe transforming them. So I had such a profound experience with someone yesterday that prompts this conversation. When they were a child of 7, their 5-year-old brother was hit and killed by a car. And the parents have blamed the 7-year-old all their whole life, because the 7-year-old had suggested that they go out for a walk, and it was on that walk that this brother ended up getting hit by a car. Of course, the child's mother was with the child and obviously responsible for the child, but she blamed the 7-year-old and has throughout the life of this person, which is just horrific and tragedy upon tragedy, because the 7-year-old suffered a horrible loss as well, right? But was never allowed to really experience that, and had always had blame foisted upon them for what had happened, which is so twisted in so many ways. And it was such a powerful session, because what happened was, the person saw their brother, and it was a process of reconciliation between the two of them, where the younger brother reached out and smiled and extended love and affection. And initially it was just too painful for the surviving person to receive that. And then over time, they ended up creating this reconnection and bond. It was so powerful. And what it did was it rewrote history, because it allowed these two people to connect through the heart. And there, it was interesting, because this person said that they never connected with their brother from the time that experience happened. And it was so moving and so profound and so healing, because this poor child had been fractured, where they had this horrible loss, and then they were made the villain. They were made the guilty one for this event having happened. And so their whole lives, they had been living with the guilt around that, and all fallout. And here, there had been they had been cut off from their own heart and from themselves. And by going back into history and creating this new bond, or reviving a bond with this lost brother, they were able to heal their heart, or begin healing their heart. And I can't even begin to tell you how profound and moving this situation was, this circumstance. And here we believe, we act with history like it's something immutable. And even in our national history, even in our human history, we are learning new things, or we are having new perspectives, where finally, after centuries of white male dominance in the history of the United States, we're learning more about the history of Indigenous people in this country, the history of Black people in this country, the history of women in this country, of marginalized groups. We're learning more about, we're getting a much broader and very different view. The people that were his heroes in our history in this country have now, in many cases, been shown not to be heroes, at the very least, and villains, perhaps even, as well. We're learning things about government and government actions, and we're learning new things that shift our perspective of history, that really kind of change the nature of that history. And as we redefine this history, it opens the doors to healing in so many ways, to creating a different dimension of inclusion, or at least the potentials for that. And it's just mind-boggling to look at this notion of history as a construct rather than a truth. And the same thing is true for ourselves in our personal lives, the stories we tell about our past. So I did work with another client who had a recollection of being tied down by parents to restrain them because they were so hyperactive. And we did work with it because it was a big trauma to be tied up as a kid, and thinking that this was something that was a regular occurrence. And through doing some work, they were able to go back to their parent and ask about this, and found out that the situation was radically different from what their memory had been. And they reached a whole different awareness and understanding. In fact, they hadn't been tied up, that the situation was radically different from their memory. And so it rewrote history, and it rewrote the context of the relationship that they had with their parents and with themselves. And it was hugely profound. And so Rosalind says, rewriting history for self is changing the internal story without having the external experiences to occur physically. This mental awareness requires emotion to change, and the heart assimilates the story internally. Or what process makes the change effective? Well, so there's great questions, Rosalind. And I think what we get to do is notice and be conscious of the fact that research actually has shown that the mind does not distinguish between an experience that was actually experienced in the quote unquote physical world from an experience that is vividly imagined. And this is something that is actually, this awareness is something that's actually applied to great effect in training, for instance, high performance athletes, to have them vividly practice over and over and over the perfect jump shot, the perfect gymnastic feat. What happens is that as we practice these things over and over perfectly in our minds, we are entraining ourselves into that experience. And so when it's really fascinating that apparently people who, I remember reading something to this effect years ago, that in studies where people practiced mentally versus practice physically, of course, they had to have the skills to begin with, but that the people who practiced mentally outperformed the people who practiced mentally outperformed the people who practiced physically. And it wasn't that black and white, I don't believe, but because they were practicing it perfect. And the people who were practicing it physically would make the errors, so that would derail their clarity somehow. I apologize for not being super articulate in expressing that, but it's pretty fascinating, the power of the mind. So when we go back into history, this experience, it's a vivid experience. And as you bring up, Rosalind, does it require emotion to change? Well, these experiences in history in this therapeutic context are very emotional. They're profoundly emotional. There's a huge amount of emotion that is associated with the issue in the first place. And then when that shifts in the context of this rewriting of history, it's kind of allowing that to emerge. There was no directive for this person, well, go hug your brother. And it took a while, but that's actually what emerged. There was no directive saying, do this, do that, do the other. It evolved very, very organically, which is where the power of it comes from. And sometimes there would be a suggestion like, would that person be available for a hug, for instance? But to experience this new context, this new perspective, a new possibility, what happens is that on a very, very deep and profound level, there's a shift. The whole container, the whole context, the whole reference point for the history, the life history changes. And as a result, the emotional dynamic changes. And so you say, what makes the process, what makes the change effective is that this is something that is occurring with great vividness in someone's mind and being. And there is absolutely emotion that's part of it, but it's transformative because it's engaging multiple levels of consciousness. And I have had so many situations where people have gone back to their little child and gone over and hugged them or held hands or talked to them. And it's been very challenging because the adult that is going to hug that child and give love and support to that child knows what's coming, knows the hardship that's coming, knows the challenges of life and the pain. They know what this person, this little child, is going to have to go through. And so that often presents a challenge for people because they can't say, it's going to they can't just say it's going to be all right. You're going to be fine. They can say that because they do come out the other end, right? And they know that the story has a happier ending. But sometimes it's really hard for them to just give the comfort. They can say, I'll be here for you through it. And that support and love and camaraderie is in itself transformative, but it's not like they change the course of events, but they change the experience of them. And so much of our history is based on, as we said, sort of selective reporting. And when a child feels isolated, frightened, and alone, if you can provide that child with companionship and support, at least they have the opportunity to go through what they go through with the support of someone else. And that in itself is transformative, which is kind of miraculous. Welcome, welcome, Jenny. Good morning. It's great to be here with you this morning. We're rewriting history today. We're talking about the power of rewriting history, both personally and collectively, and the healing power that can come out of that. It's magic. Our minds are so powerful. So Jenny, perfect timing for this conversation. Jenny says, I was a child with unmet needs. I was researching it over the weekend. So Jenny, you and so many of us have been children with unmet needs. And what we're talking about here is also something that is referred to in a way through NLP as timeline therapy. Sort of, timeline therapy is a variation on this, but where we can go back and provide support as an adult that has greater wisdom and greater experience, and an adult who's known that we survived it. We can go back to that child and comfort that child and be there as a support for that child as that child goes through time, so that we can actually, as our adult self, meet some of those needs that were unmet when we were children. And it's profoundly transformative. It's the closest thing to magic I've seen. It's really, really remarkable. And so, Jenny, you say you were wondering how to do that. You just go into a quiet state and see yourself as that little child that is so deeply needing support and encouragement and love, and find that child and offer that to her. And it may be that she's not receptive at first. She may not be, and you need to be respectful of that. You know, she may be skeptical. She may be very deeply protected, and you get to maybe just be there with her and let her begin to trust you and trust that you'll be there for her. Rosalind says the awareness requires courage, brutal self-honesty. So awareness is the beginning, you know, and when we recognize that there's a part of us that is wounded, we do have the ability to be there for that part of ourselves. And it's remarkable what happens, you know, when, you know, maybe the child will let you sit next to them. Maybe they'll let you hold their hand. Maybe they'll let you hug them. In the case that I was talking about earlier, this morning, it was the child who reached out to the adult. And the adult had a lot to overcome to be able to be receptive to the child, because there was so much pain in that relationship. But it's magical. It's quite phenomenal, like a phenomena, that our minds in perceiving our past can shift perspective dramatically, that we can rewrite our own history in this way, and we can provide the nurturance that we needed, and it changes everything. We can see that in our history now as we're learning more about what what has happened with different races and ethnicities in this country, in the history of this country, and it's breeding a different consciousness and awareness of what's happening in present day. And hopefully there's healing that is taking place as a result of this. So Jenny says, I want that so I can release those emotions holding me back, just learning how to process a different way to let it go. So being present to the pain of that child and nurturing that child the way that you would nurture any child in that kind of situation of pain and suffering, you know, it's a big start to give that grace to yourself as that child. So I suggest like do that as a meditation, Jenny, and see if you can talk to that little girl and cultivate a relationship with her so she knows she's not alone. It's kind of magical what can happen. So with that, I'm going to call it a morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network. And Jenny says, I was listening to the author of The Untethered Soul. I forget his name, but he got me thinking. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. Super powerful book. I recommend it to anybody. And congratulations for checking that out, Jenny. Until next time, I just am so grateful to all of you for sharing your hearts and your minds and your time. And until next time, so much.